Welcome to another episode of the Fighting Men of Rhodesia YouTube series. My guest today is Jim Schneeberger, who was in the Selous Scouts. Jim, lovely to have you on board. Welcome.
Danny, thank you. Thank you very much, not just for this opportunity, but for everything you and John do, keeping our memories alive. You've had some pretty big guns on your show before, so I'm feeling a little bit. Those are big shoes to fill. So I'm not going to try and do that, and I'll try not to be intimidated. But thank you again for giving me
Well,
this opportunity.
it's a pleasure. And as I've said to other guys, it's really, we're not here to compare. And every person, in my opinion, that wore a uniform was very brave because in some abstract way, they were a target to the enemy. So that's great. I'm so relieved that you've come forward to give me your talk. It's as I expressed to you off camera, it's getting very hard to get people to talk. I don't know why, but it's important that we do for our history. And for the men that can't give us their story, let's give them their story. Now, before we came online, we were chatting about our joint past. You went
Yes.
to Churchill's school. You started the year I left, and I think one of the prefect was it Ray Mort? Was he head boy?
No, Raymond, I don't believe was head boy. We had Butfik, and then he left the school,
Yeah.
uh, and then chap called Laresh, whose father was a teacher, I think he became the head boy. But I was way too too junior at the age of 12 to 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 even consider knowing these guys. So I mean, it was, as you well know, Churchill was like I don't know if prison's the right word, but you had 1,500 boys from the ages of 12 to 19,
Yeah.
um, all kind of congregated into a pretty small area. And but I don't remember you bullying me, so that's a good way to kick off the conversation.
Yeah, I I did punch a few guys, but I'm slow to anger. Um, so give us an overview of where you were born and raised and how you got into the military, Jim.
Okay, well, I got into the military like most people. I was called up, but anyway, I was I was born in Salisbury, as it was known then. Um, I was supposed to be born in Ndola in northern Rhodesia, but my parents were down in southern Rhodesia on holiday, and I suddenly was born and went back to northern Rhodesia after my birth with my folks to Ndola, and I think about 5, maybe 4 years later, they moved down to southern Rhodesia, which became Rhodesia. Um, when we lived in Whitcomb Road, not far from Cranbourne Barracks. I went to Eastridge Junior School, and then that was a feeder school for Churchill. So I went there. I have a brother 6 years younger than me, Tony, who also went to Churchill, but thankfully after I had left, and he was too young to join the military because by the time he got to the age of 18, the war was over.
And so you've gone through all your experiences, and now you're living in Raleigh, in North Carolina.
Correct. Living just outside of Raleigh in North Carolina. It's a very nice part of the world. We had some snow last night for the first time in years, and yeah, live here with my wife, my beautiful wife Marianne, and some of her kids, occasionally some of my kids. It's kind of like the Brady Bunch meets Hellraiser, but anyway.
Yeah, I was there for a holiday in North Carolina in Winston-Salem, which I think is a bit south of you,
Yep.
uh, in 2010. We arrived one evening and all the leaves were just coming out. Beautiful ex-Cheyenne countryside, full of forests and waterfalls. What a stunning place, the Appalachian Mountains. And the next morning we got up to go for a walk around the lake, and everything had been burnt black. It was black and we could barely breathe as we were walking. So that
Really.
that put paid to our little walk around that place. But what a stunning part of the world. I mean, North Carolina is beautiful, going right up into Tennessee. All that area is lovely. Yeah.
Yeah, and into Virginia. Well, where we live is beautiful, but there's there's a lot of businesses growing here, especially in the IT and pharmaceutical world. So there's a lot more people coming to live here. So a lot more of these forests are getting chopped down. The trees are going, the animals are going, and there's these housing developments in place, and it's very sad to see. But I guess that's progress.
Yeah, but we went right up into the Appalachians where the hillbillies live, and you could almost hear that guitar guy from Deliverance, ding, 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 ding. And
Yep.
you sort of look into your rearview mirror a lot when you drive up there. You don't know if one of these monsters is going to walk out, or some hillbilly who's had been born through his mother 15 times or whatever. A bit of a frightening place, to be honest.
Or if Burt Reynolds is going to shoot you with a crossbow.
Yeah. Um,
But um,
Coming
but
back to reality, what did you do when you left school?
okay, well, I was, for want of a better term, I'd say I was a bit of a skate at school. Um, Continually getting punished for disobeying the rules. Like my hair would touch my collar, I'd get a beating. My socks would be down, I'd get a beating. In fact, we had a new headmaster come in my second last year, and he called me and a couple of my mates up after assembly, and we kind of thought, hey, the dude wants to ask us how we run things, and he beat us each. Six of the best, and I said, sir, what was that for? He said, not for what you've done, but for what you're going to do. And I was always in credit.
Good one.
And two of the guys, no, one of the guys is still alive, and he'll remember that story very well. But as I kind of stumbled my way through my exams, wanting to leave after my O levels. My folks kind of wanted me to stay. I wanted to leave after my M levels. My folks wanted me to stay, and then eventually I scraped by with two A levels, not very advanced subjects. But anyway, that because my intention was to go to university, and I'll cover what happened there later on. But like everybody else, like you, like all of our peers at school, we all knew we were going to join the military. Um, it's funny, my daughters have asked me if I had these careers evenings, where people from various industries come and poach the top talent. And I said, yeah, we did have these evenings, and it consisted of the army, the police, and the air force. I mean, those were our career choices. So I think from about the age of 16, you start trying to figure out what you want to do, where you'd like to be. You want to stick with some mates, you want to whatever. Um, so we finished school. I think it was like in September, October. Had a break until January 79, beginning of January, and then it seemed the entire world descended on Cranbourne Barracks. And it was just kind of mass chaos. There were guys from everywhere, every part of the country. Some guys you didn't like, a lot of guys you did like. And after a brief introduction, where a couple of guys with long hair were called out and made examples of, we were told we can go to the representatives of the units that we intended to go to. And there was RLI, SAS, Scouts, RAR, Guard Force, INTAF, engineers, armored cars, the whole lot. And a couple of my mates and I had decided we'd try for Scouts. I had friends who had brothers in the unit. I had met Mac McGuinness through some friends at school, and who knew his daughter. And we'd go around to his place, and he'd show us the latest captured communist weapons, and there was kind of an aura about the brown beret and the green stable belt, but it was like if you're going to do it, you may as well try and go for the top. So 60 of us were lined up. They came and looked at us, gave us cursory glances to see if we should be in the sick, lame, and lazy category. They kicked a few guys off, and the rest of us boarded buses. And we went to Andre Rabi Barracks or Nkoma Barracks, where the Selous Guards were based. And it was, yeah, it was. Remember, you're 18 and a half, 19 years old. Um, the intake with the 60 guys were divided up between, I'd say, 60% Afrikaners or Afrikaans farming guys, and the balance were townies. I was one of those townies. Um, we arrived, we debussed, lined up, kind of fairly. Things were fairly polite at the beginning. Captain David Scott Donnellan was the officer commanding training troop at Selous Scouts. We were divided up into two groups, Warwicker and Nell, named after Rob Warwicker and Yanni Nell, who had both fallen. The entire training troop area, I remember, was all thatched buildings. We saw the parade square, not really knowing what to expect. And we were divided up into these. There were three barracks. So you had Warwick and Nell, and then you had a mixture of the two. And that was when we really started. Then the usual vaccinations, inoculations. We were assigned two very, very good instructors, Colour Sergeant Clive Larratt, who I don't know if you know, but he's actually a chaplain in the British Army now. He was ex-RLI and joined the Selous Scouts. And Sergeant Kevin Taylor, also RLI, joined the Selous Scouts. They were our two course instructors, one for Werker, one for Nell. And then we had a number of very, very fine AS NCOs that were also instructors to us. And I only found out about this later, but David Scott Donnellan, who I became really, really good friends with, who had a tremendous military career starting in the Rhodesian SAS, Northern Rhodesia, then RLI, then Selous Scouts, and then down to 5 Recce in Palabora. He told me later that, you know, he said to Colonel Reed Daly, what do you want me to do with this lot? And Reed Daly said, I want you to turn them into fighting soldiers. I don't care if they're bad at drill. Just get them to be fighting soldiers. Because remember, at that time, the war was pretty hot. And there weren't going to be a lot of parades and stuff like that. You know, as long as we could make our passing out parade after 6 weeks, he was happy. So that's what Scott D did. So while we did drill, change parades, shine parades, stuff like that, more of the focus was on the soldiering. A lot of range work, a lot of physical fitness. Yeah, and look, let me just say that in doing this interview, I hope that I'm speaking for all the guys that were in intake 163 that went to the Selous Scouts. And if I get anything, or because we're all getting on now, if I forget anything or make a mistake somewhere, please have them send you a message and correct that. I'm just working off memory and a couple of notes. So,
do you remember the names of any of those guys that became better known later on in the war?
We have a group, a 163 group with a group chat, and you know, these guys are friends for life. Some sadly have passed on, and the group is not a Selous Scouts group. It's a 163 starting off with the Selous Scouts group. Some of the guys distinguish themselves with RLI. but I don't think as troopers that our names ever got famous. We did a job, but guys like Quinton Hall, Kester Bezuidenhout, Spot Ryan, Norman Neve, Ian Farrell, just to name a few, Paul Dabbs, just to name a few of the guys. These truly are friends for life, and although we don't see each other, we had a 30-year reunion in South Africa where as many of us got together as could. And the amazing thing was you didn't, and maybe you found this out, you didn't spend the day and the night catching up on what's transpired in the 30 years since you last met. You kind of carried on with conversations that you had when you last saw the guys.
Mm.
And it's amazing how people don't change. If one guy was a whinger before, he's a whinger now. If one guy was laid back then, he's laid back now. It's just amazing how people stay the same. And but really the instruction we got, or the training we got for that in that first 6 weeks, it was intense, but a lot of it made sense. Clive Larratt and Kevin Taylor were excellent instructors, as were the AS. And in fact, the AS sergeants and corporals, they took no crap at all. And it was quite interesting to suddenly see a 19-year-old who had been brought up on a farm, let's say, standing there getting poked in the chest by an African sergeant. But they gained our respect within a day. Well, it wasn't a question of respect; you had to listen to them. But they also had a very soft side to them, which it wasn't soft, but it was caring.
Mm.
Quite often they'd come and ask us how things were going and everything okay, and they were, and I think, and let me just go back a little bit, because our national service intake, I think it was only the second or maybe third national service intake that went directly to the Selous Scouts. Everybody else in the previous years would go to Llewellyn for their training and then choose a unit to go to. I think that's probably what you did, Tony, in your time. You went to Llewellyn before you went to School of Infantry, right?
Correct, yeah.
And again, this was Colonel Reed Daly's ideas to start training the youngsters the way he felt we needed to operate. And this, you'll see this goes through our coin and pre-selection and selection. And I think the instructors, and they can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think they knew that we were guys that would be operating alongside them, and it gave it a more humane feel, but more of a personal feel. I mean, they didn't take any nonsense from us, and like everybody, we always think we know better than the instructors until you find out you don't. And we had the Selous Scouts DB just down the road, which was run by Chris Pretorius, and he was not a guy you wanted to even meet.
His reputation went before him, didn't it?
But one day some of us were slouching around or whatever while we're at training troop, and 6 of us were sent to DB for the day. And I mean, that was a microcosm in that day of what DB would be like if you were sent there for 28 days. And it was just a combination of assault course, boxing with Chris Pretorius, telling the Padre that everything was fine, and it was just it was funny. But anyway, back to the first couple of days. I think the second day we were there, we were all called into one of the classrooms, and we were given a Ronia letter. And I sent you a copy, and it was to Dear Mr., and you fill out mom, dad, brother, sister, wife, girlfriend, and that's it. and then everything else is typed out for you. The food's really good. I'm being treated so well. No need to contact us. You know, this is really a great place to be. And then you've got a little place where you could write a couple of comments, and they checked, of course, that the comments weren't sarcastic. You signed it and you sent it to your parents, and that was how my folks learned that's where I had chosen to go. And then we passed out after 6 weeks, passing out parade where we were heavily expected to perform. We did some hockey drill for the parents and did a march past, and afterwards Colonel Reed Daly addressed all our folks or wives or whatever, and that. We were still recruits, but we had passed our first phase, let's say, and I think 5 guys were back squatted, 4 or 5 guys were back squatted, and the rest of us carried on with our training.
And at what point did you start doing any specialized training? Was that in the next phase?
The next phase was horrendous. It was in a place you're very familiar with, in Guello at the School of Infantry. Cold as hell, dark as hell. The ground was like granite, and we were going to be trained for 3 weeks in classical warfare, lugging around the concrete landmines, digging a trench every night, up sticks the next day, move at night. Horrendous. It really was awful. You got your 8 memoirs and this and that and everything else. And where things came to a bit of a head is that the officer recruits were our officers on all our exercises. Okay, and you know this. I'm just talking to the other guys out there and the rest of my mates. And they would boss you around. And some of these guys you'd just been in school with, a couple of weeks ago. You got to do this, you got to do that, move faster, dig deeper. Your trench had to be deep enough so you could stand up in it, and there had to be a sleeping compartment. Or anyway, I was teamed up with another chap called Wayne Butch. Really, really nice guy. He went on to the RLI, I believe. And we decided this is enough. Tonight we're not digging a trench, so we dug a shell scrape, basically. We're kind of lying there exhausted, and I don't know, middle of the night, somebody's yelling at us and pointing a torch, and what's going on? What do you think this is? And I turned around and, with this torch in my eye, and said, "It's an effing trench. What do you think it is?" Thinking it was one of the recruits or the officer cadets. And sadly, it turned out to be Lieutenant or Captain Graham Murdoch, who I think had the Silver Cross at this stage. And things didn't work out well for me and my buddy. We were doubled to outside the officers' mess, I think it was, where we had to dig a 6x6x6. Okay, well, in that ground, that's not a very easy thing, even with a jackhammer. But anyway, we survived that. And the officers will be sitting there on the veranda having beers of an evening while we were digging 6x6x6. But we completed that phase as well without any casualties. We went back for some R&R. As I say, I lived in Salisbury. My parents lived in Salisbury, and a lot of my mates on the course with me lived all around the country. So a few of them would come and stay at my place, and my folks were great. And after the first visit, every consecutive visit, my mother would put buckets beside the beds these guys were sleeping in, because there was a lot of booze consumed on our R&Rs. And then it was coin. We went up to Kariba for 6 weeks coin. And to answer your question, that's when we started really, really getting acclimatized with the training and what was to be expected of us. And there was a lot of emphasis on the physical side, a lot of running, a lot of sandbag PT, a lot of log PT. Running up and down the airstrip was a particular favorite with the instructors, but we would do jungle lane, night ambushes, that kind of training. With a few incidents on training, there was a very large baobab tree overlooking the lake, and it had a rope and a bell on top of it. It was a metal circular plate and a metal bell, and if you screwed up, you had to climb up there, ring the bell, and you learn very quickly that you can't do this with your arms. You see guys trying to climb up using just their arms and not making it. So you had to twist the rope between your legs and kind of shimmy your way up. And one of my dear friends, Bears, he got almost to the top and he slipped and he came down with his legs still wrapped around the rope, and he got these massive rope burns, and they were so bad that he had to cut his shorts so they were a skirt. He couldn't have his legs in there, and yeah, it went gangrenous, and people didn't want to stay in the same bivvy as him, but he survived that as well and became a very good soldier. And at that stage, there was plenty of food. We were getting fed properly because we hadn't started the selection course. And yeah, you learned a lot about at that stage because Dave Scott Donald was in charge. You learned a lot about tracking, anti-tracking, a lot about our weapons, the CT weapons. We even, yeah, this was on the coin phase. We even had a wonderful lady called Philippa Berlin come and lecture us on African customs. I mean, A, it was a great lecture, and B, it meant we got to sit in a shaded place for a few hours. So as you can imagine, when she said, "Were there any questions?" at the end, everybody's hands just shot up and tried to drag this out
Yeah.
as long as we could.
Did you ever have to eat the famous dead maggot-filled baboon?
Oh, no, that's on selection. We were still on the coin phase, so we were getting fed as if they wanted us to stay. And then after that, we went on something called pre-selection, which was an additional 2 weeks in Kariba at Wafa Wafa Godoy camp. And I think it was, they didn't really see much point in sending us back to Salisbury if there was a selection coming up in 2 weeks' time. So it was called pre-selection. And that was when we kind of got introduced to the instructors that would be taking our selection. There were regular officers, TAs, TA NCOs. So we kind of hung out there for 2 weeks, doing the assault course, doing more live firing, doing more range work. I was looking at my notes. I managed to keep this diary. I think we're all familiar with those. And I kept some sparse notes in it, along with some doodles and war is hell and I am bored and things like that. And that's when I started to list the guys that were continuing, the guys that were dropping off, and guys were dropping off for various reasons. This is still pre-selection, but there are a lot of accidents. One guy fell off a vehicle, another guy got some shrapnel in him on the live firing exercise. So I think of the 60, when we finished pre-selection, we were down to maybe 45, something like that. But guys weren't dropping off voluntarily because it was still fairly comfortable, let's say, for want of a better word. And we thought we'd be smart and we'd bury food around. And, no one's ever going to find that, because we know better than the instructors. Anyway, so that carried on for the 2 weeks. as I say, the training troop team was replaced by the selection squad, and yeah, we had a lot of night marches, endurance marches down to the banana farm. That banana farm, well, there's stories about that anyway. I'll get to those. So one day we all get called, form up. There's been a terrorist attack on the Tetsi camp or the banana farm or whatever it is. So now here we go. We're not bad scouts yet because we haven't done selection, but we're going to go on a contact. Well, that's what we thought until we got to the Chirara turnoff. It was going to be the beginning of selection. Now, some of us kind of thought this was a bit suspicious, and others were like, "Hey, this is it." Anyway, we sat by the side of the road for I don't know how many hours until these other vehicles arrived from Salisbury, and it was men from other units who were going to be trying this selection, and there were decorated officers. There were guys that just wanted a break from what they were doing. But it was, and Tony, I can't remember the exact number, and maybe some of the guys out there can remember, but it was about 150 guys trying for the selection. And the first part of the selection was to run in from the Chirara turnoff to Waffa Waffa. And as usual, some of the guys had overestimated the comfort, and they bought some sporting equipment and a few suitcases and things like that. And they had to run in with that. And there was a certain cut-off time. I don't know if it was 2 hours or 3 hours, and anyone that didn't make it was off. And that's how the selection course began. How are we doing for time here?
No problem. Just keep going.
Okay, so selection had started. Everybody got thrown in the lake, spent a couple of hours in the lake, and then came out and had to sleep where we were. I think we had an advantage because we kind of knew what was at Godoy Waffa Waffa, the assault course and various things. So anyway, we selection was 21 days long. I know that because it ended on my 19th birthday, 22nd of June. The end of selection, the last 3 days were an endurance march, that famous endurance march with the 60, 70 pounds rocks in your back, through the bush from Waffa Waffa to Makuti, and then walking from Makuti to a certain point. Maybe the Chirara turn off again. Anyway, the endurance was tough. You had to go up Gota Gota, the famous hill, mountain, whatever you wish to call it. And at the end of endurance, it wasn't finished yet. You had to do a run-in with ammo boxes filled with sand with the handles cut off. There was one ammo box between three, and again, I sent you some photos of that. So one guy would carry the ammo box, another guy would carry the 3 rifles, and one guy would rest. And eventually we got there. But to go back to your question about the famous baboon, the second day we got there, one of the instructors shot a baboon, hung it up in a tree for 4 days till it was, fairly ripe. And 4 days later, we were told you're going to get fed. Everyone rushes to be first. It's pitch dark. You don't know what it is, but it smells good. So, you get in your mess tin, you get a slapping of sadza, and then you go line up, you get your nyama, and everyone's sitting down having a wonderful time until somebody comes across a hand with fingers and fingernails, and then we figure out it's actually the bobo we're eating. Some guys went back for seconds, if I remember correctly. But yeah, it was something to eat after after 5 days. And after we came back from the starter selection, we found the whole area where we'd hidden our tins had been burned by the instructors. So the tins had exploded, the mealie meal, the pro nutro, it was all gone. So much for being smart. And yeah, I think that's enough about selection. I did write an article in the Selous book, The Men Speak, which does cover it. But we got to work with some fantastic soldiers: Charlie Krause, John Scott, Stretch, Steve Gordon, Bob McCleary, John Langton, and these were all guys that we were going to operate with later on. So I think it helped them evaluate the guys with whom they will be working with, like that guy snores, or that, you know what I mean, that kind of thing. But a big shout out from me personally to Stretch. I was the last to come in on the endurance march. I don't know, maybe he had 5Ks to go, and he said, "You're not quitting." And he walked with me for the last 5Ks, and all we concentrated on was the next marker, the next half K marker or half mile marker it was. And he never helped me with carrying my pack or anything like that, but he gave me mental encouragement and basically wouldn't let me give up. And for that, I owe him a debt of gratitude. And then we went back. I think there were 45 of us, 40 or 45 that passed out. I sent you a photograph of that along with the instructors. We went, oh, that's right. The night we finished, they'd shot an impala, and there was a braai and beer and whatever. Most guys just went to sleep. The only thing I ate or drank was a tin of condensed milk. You know, you get that craving for some sugar. And then it was back to Salisbury. I think we had like maybe a week's R&R, and then we went down for our paracourse, which we did in Duku Duku, Zululand, with the Rekis. We had amazing instructors. It was Color Sergeant Dave Tippett, who sadly was killed on the border with Mozambique later on in the South African War. And Sergeant Ralph Moore, who is pretty much of a legend. He had served in the UK then, and he was a badged Selous Scout as well. So that we had weekends off in Durban. They would bus us into Durban, and we'd be left on our own. I mean, some guys slept in jail cells of their own choice because there was no one had money to stay in hotels. We had this was all clandestine. We flew down in one of Jock Malloch's planes to Durban. We spent a couple of days, nights on the bluff, and then we were bused to Duku Duku in and everybody passed their paracourse. There were no injuries, but we found there was a big difference when we got back to Rhodesia, because while you're still jumping out of a Dakota, there are differences, such as in South Africa, you throw your static line strop. I'll get this mixed up, but you throw your strop to the side before you jump out. In Rhodesia, you've got an overhead cable, and you've got to throw your strop forward. Also, the parachutes we trained on in Durban were steerables. You had two toggles where you could kind of move one way or the other. When we came back to Rhodesia and used the Xaviacs, I think they were called, if you wanted to turn, you had to reach up on your rigging line and pull it down in the direction you hoped you would go. So those are just a couple of the the differences. So we got our South African wings. We went back to Rhodesia. We did a couple of conversion jumps at New Serum to cover those points that I mentioned earlier. And then let me just look at my notes quickly, if you don't mind.
What did the very first jump feel like to you, Jim? Were you petrified?
Well, I mean, a lot of the guys had never been to bloody aeroplane before, so even that was an experience. And this isn't, as you well know, the DACs are not luxury Boeings, and you had that intense smell of aviation flu. You had nervous guys, you were joking guys, it smelled. I mean, the guys were sweating. You were in the South African brown heavy uniforms. You had helmets on that didn't fit. Nobody had ever jumped before, and Ralph Moore used to stand up there, when the red light moved to green, stand up, hook up, check equipment, and he would say, "It'll only take a minute," and and that was just like, "Don't worry, guys, everything's going to be okay." Nobody stopped in the door and said, I'm not going to do this." There was one guy we thought was having a Roman candle, but he managed to pull out of it. I can't remember. I walked on somebody's chute, or they walked on my chute in one of the jumps, which is not a great thing. But these were training jumps, and these were, I don't know, 2,000 feet. So the first thing that struck me going out the door was the silence. Mm-hmm. It was just dead calm. Then you'd hear some guys whooping and, "I'm okay," and whatever. And it was, let's put it this way: I've never jumped in Civvy Street. That was, that kind of stuff was enough. And some of the guys have gone on and done thousands of free fall jumps and national champions, and yeah, amazing. But anyway, so we now come back from that. Well, I think we get another couple of days R&R. We're now in, I think it's about July of '97, and it's now we're going to be deployed. We were part of the Selous Scouts support group, which was made up of regulars, TAs, and national service officers and NCOs. Just something to note: when Colonel Pat Armstrong took over the Selous Scouts after Colonel Reed Daly left, he changed the name from support group to assault group, and he said support group wasn't aggressive enough, and it made sense. And we were essentially, the Selous Scouts evolved over the years, where it started off as a pseudo operating force. Then the columns came in, the columns into Mozambique. And then because the war was really stretching the reserves of the country, we started being deployed in fire force positions or fire force deployments as well. Our first, and I'm talking for the same guys, when I refer to us, I'm talking about the guys from my intake. Our first deployment was to an area you know very well, Victoria Falls, where we were based at the FAF there.